sort of introduce the man behind the curtain. You won't be able to see him. Brian Leggett is running our technical side. And I'm now going to turn it over to another member of the Chesterfield Township Democrats Executive Committee, Kathy Merrick, for tonight's announcements.
Yes, good evening. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I just want to quickly tell you about some of the other programs and things that are going on with Chesterfield Township Dems. First of all, 1 week from this evening at the same time, Tuesday night, the 15th, we will be hosting Denise Lieberman as our speaker, who is a staff attorney for the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition, who will be talking to us about voter protection in Missouri. And then on October 13th, we will be hosting the candidates for Lieutenant Governor, the Democratic candidates. We will have Rich Finneran, he's Attorney General, running for Attorney General, Rich Finneran, and for Lieutenant Governor, Alyssa Kennedy will be our guest that evening. I'd like to quickly say, for those of you who may be tuned in who are not Chesterfield Democrats, we have a website, chesterfielddemocrats.org, where you may go and sign up online, become a member. We have a very active group of Democrats you'll enjoy meeting, and we have a newsletter that goes out every other week with lots of opportunities for Democrats. Like to also give you a little bit of updated information about voting. A lot of this might be a repeat and a review for you, but just to remind you that now until October 21st, you can apply for an application for an absentee or a mail-in ballot, and you can get that at movote.org. Very simple, movote.org. And then on September 22nd, that's the day that the absentee and mail-in ballots will be mailed out to people that will begin. That is also the first day that an absentee ballot can be returned at the main office of the Missouri Election Board at Northwest Plaza. It is also the first day that a person can vote absentee in person at that same location at Northwest Plaza. And then October 7th, you probably know, is the last day to register to vote. If you have any friends or know anyone out there who's not voted, it's not registered, please grab them by the collar and get them registered by October 7th. And then October 22nd is the date that the satellite offices of the Missouri Election Board will be opening. And there are satellite offices in all areas of town. The one closest to most of us in Chesterfield is at the Clarkson Wilson Center. It's 82 Clarkson Road, and that's the West County Government Center. And on October 22nd, you may drop off an absentee ballot, a completed absentee ballot, or a close family member could drop it off for an incapacitated person. It is also the first day there at the satellites that a person can vote absentee in person. And so that's a very important to know that those locations exist. And one last reminder, mail-in ballots cannot be dropped off, cannot be submitted any other way except mailed. They must be notarized as well as mailed. So that's an important distinction to be aware of. Just like to say that I'm going to give it back to Rich, who's going to Mike, I'm sorry, to Mike, who's going to introduce our speakers for the evening. Thank you. Mike.
Thank you, Kathy. Just a quick outline of what we're going to be doing tonight. First, I'm going to be introducing Vicki Englund, who's going to be talking about rebuilding the Missouri Democratic Party. And after that, we'll be hearing from Yinka Faleti about his candidacy. During and after those, we will open it up for question and answers. If you have a question, you will see a chat box. Please submit all your questions using the chat box. I will be able to see those, and then I will be asking questions of the candidates after both of their presentations. So with that, let's get started this evening. We have a very full evening with lots of good information. So first, I'm going to introduce Vicki Englund. She's an entrepreneur and former school board member and a former legislator, from South St. Louis County. Vicki plans to use her small business experience to help Missouri businesses adapt to the new economic normal. But as you will find out, Vicki is also passionate about rebuilding the Democratic Party from the ground up. Vicki believes we have gone too long for our party to recover and regrow all by itself. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Vicki.
Great, Mike. Thank you so much. And thank you, Chesterfield Dems, for inviting me tonight. I'm very glad that, on the one hand, I'm glad it's after Labor Day, which means that we are getting closer and closer to Election Day. I'm also excited to be here with my good friend, Yinka Faleti. Yinka and I are traveling the Zoom circuit, as you might know, as candidates. It's very difficult to get out and shake hands and kiss babies from your basement. Luckily, I have a baby here that I can kiss whenever I want. So as Mike said, my name is Vicki Englund. I was first elected to the Missouri House back in 2008. That is a year that politics was a little bit more normal, if you will. We had an amazing leadership structure at both our national level and our state level. I was elected as one of the 3 Democratic pickups that year. We actually flipped the seat in South St. Louis County from Republican to Democrat, so go blue team. Then in 2008, I was able to serve and pass legislation as a freshman and really enjoyed my service, so I decided to run again in 2010. Now, the woman that I had beat in 2008, she beat me in 2010. I beat her in 2012. She beat me in 2014. And I came about 400 votes shy of winning in 2016. So some people say that that is what true dedication is all about. Other people say I'm absolutely crazy. But in any case, in the middle of all that, I also ran and served on the Lindbergh School Board for 6 years. So I guess you could say I am very passionate about politics. And I know a thing or two about running in a Republican area. I know how to both win and lose in Republican areas. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to take my focus this cycle on running statewide. So as you might be able to tell from my background, all of that winning and losing was actually dependent on turnout. And so when I won in 2012, I'd actually been redistricted, so it was a new district, and half of it was new. And I won by 313 votes in 2012. And so what happened in my district is what I think happens every year, every cycle. If it's a presidential year in my district in South County, you would have about 16,000 total voters in the state rep seat. If you are in an off year, so a non-presidential year, you'd have about half as many people voting in that election. And so the swinging back and forth, as always, it's just a matter of who shows up. And that's why the year 2020 is so exciting on many, many levels. So prior to serving in the legislature, I got my bachelor's and master's degree from the American University in Washington, D.C. And right after grad school, I worked for the Clinton administration, working at the Small Business Administration in the Office of Women's Business Ownership before I moved back home to St. Louis to start a family and also work for St. Louis County doing economic development. Before I moved back to Missouri, I started my own business. So I've been an online retail business owner from 1999 when selling online and buying online was not as popular as it is today. So that's the kind of experience that I plan to bring to the treasurer's office. So you might be saying to yourself, well, gosh, what the heck does the treasurer do? Well, let me tell you what the treasurer does. It's one of those jobs that is more administrative in function. However, during COVID-19, it's really become much more important. So one of the things that the treasurer's office now does is processing the payments from Washington, D.C. for the CARES Act. And that particular disaster-related funding goes out to individual counties, and it's the treasurer who directs where those payments go. Unless you are a county or a municipality that has more than 500,000 people in your population, then that money has to go through Jefferson City and the treasurer's office first. So you definitely want someone who is directing funds to believe in things like COVID relief, to believe in things like wearing masks, someone who understands what our small businesses and our schools and our communities are going through. You don't want someone who does not even think that this is an issue that we need to be worried about. Some of the more traditional things that the treasurer's office does has to do with investing your taxpayer dollars. So for example, before the General Assembly spends any money or passes a bill to authorize the spending of money and the governor's office actually spends the money, then that money doesn't just sit around in a bank account. It's the treasurer who invests that money and tries to make money on your taxpayer dollars, like you would expect any banker or any financial investment representative to do on your behalf. So our current treasurer invests money in things like Walmart and other places that you probably don't agree with. The previous treasurer, when we had a Democratic treasurer back in the day, Clint Zweifel, he did not do those same types of investments. One of the other things the treasurer's office does is administer the 529 college savings accounts. And for those of you who don't know what that is, I'm not surprised you don't know. That's one of the things that I think the treasurer's office needs to do a better job of, is letting you know all of the great programs that we have. That account is a student savings account for college that you can open for your own children, your grandchildren, the kid down the street, your niece, your nephew, whomever you want. And it really gives a good focus. As a first person in my family to go to college, I would have greatly benefited from an account like that. So the treasurer also sits on a number of boards throughout the state. So for example, the Missouri Housing Development Commission is one of the boards the treasurer sits on. The Mosers Board, which is the Retirement System for State Employees Board. Also sits on the Missouri Arts Council and the Missouri Historical Society. So the treasurer does a lot of different roles, and you definitely want someone who shares your values in that position. One of the things the current treasurer wants to do is start processing school vouchers through the treasurer's office. And because I am an advocate for public education, I will not be doing that as state treasurer. This is not a time to be taking money away. There's not actually any good time to be taking money away from our public schools. Also, my opponent did away with the Missouri housing, the low-income housing tax credit program when he was chair on the budget committee for the Missouri House. So I believe that we need to empower our communities and not take away housing. We have housing shortages everywhere, and that's definitely something the treasurer will not be doing under an Englund administration. So it's a little bit about what the treasurer's office does. Also does unclaimed property. I could talk to you for hours on all of those types of things. But one of the things I really wanted to focus on tonight is rebuilding the Democratic Party. So after my last loss in 2016, I kind of took a step back. I sat out the 2018 cycle. I kind of took a look. I reevaluated where I was in my life. I had gotten remarried, had a baby, and was really starting to find a really great place where my husband and I could build our family. And a lot of you in West County and Chesterfield know my husband, Byron DeLear. He ran several times for office in that area. We have since relocated to Sunset Hills in South St. Louis County. And we decided about a year ago that it was time for me to run statewide. And I think other than being the treasurer and having a really great small business background, I'll be able to direct small business and agricultural loans that the treasurer's office does toward businesses hit hardest by COVID. I'll be able to have entrepreneurial videos on the treasurer's website, encouraging people to bring their businesses online where they can find a broader audience and try to get through this economic downturn that we're in. In addition to doing those types of things, I just knew that as a party, we were losing seats every year. It's very easy to sit on the sidelines and say, oh my gosh, why are we losing these House seats? Why are we losing these Senate seats? And I know many of you are very much aware of the Clean Missouri proposal that passed in 2018, and hopefully you are even more aware of defeating the Dirty Missouri proposition that's going to be on the ballot in November. So one of the things we need to tackle is gerrymandering. But in the meantime, we also have to run more candidates. Now, I've tried to recruit candidates a little bit here and there before I started running for treasurer, and it's very difficult to be a candidate. You know, I don't want to say it's very difficult for all of those who you are thinking about it, or those of you who may be getting my phone call, because I am already recruiting for 2022. But what I can tell you is that when you run for office, you are basically running against the person who's there already, or if it's an open seat. So you're running against another person who wants that job just as bad as you do. And in some districts in Missouri, it's going to take us a few cycles. It'll take us a few cycles to win those seats. As you know, term limits are in place, so we know the approximate time when each district is going to have an open seat opportunity. And when I was running for office, the district just south of me didn't always have someone running in it. It's a very conservative district, a difficult place to run as a pro-choice Democrat. And because of that, that state rep would raise money, and this is back in the day when you could do this, raise money and then give it to my opponent. So I was basically running against two state reps that were raising money. And that's not fair, by the way, and it's difficult. So when we have candidates in every district, we're not only able to help focus our funds and make sure that we are giving everybody a run for their money, but I've also been talking to a lot of people statewide about, people will tell me, we haven't had a Democrat run for state rep here in the last 10 years, or in the last 15 years, the last 5 years. And so I'm learning from people that there are parts of our state where Democrats still live, but we don't necessarily have people in those communities running for office to let them know that we haven't forgotten them. So that's one of the reasons why it's my goal to rebuild the Democratic Party. We have great leaders right now in our House and Senate, but there's not enough of them. It's very difficult to run a party when you don't have a whole lot of sitting elected officials, either in the House or Senate or even statewide. So we need to do what the Republicans do, and we need to build our bench. We can work smarter. We don't have to work harder, although we end up doing both, to be honest with you. So that's kind of one of my main goals, is to rebuild. So why 2020? What is so special about this campaign season that I'm going to tell you what I and other politicians tell you every year, that this is the most important election in your lifetime? Well, all those other times we told you those were the most important elections in your lifetime, we were wrong. This year is actually the most important, and it's for several reasons. I don't have to tell you how different our lives have changed because of COVID. I don't have to tell you that we have had to rethink and redo everything in our lives. There are so many small businesses and farms that are really struggling to keep their doors open because they don't have the customers coming into their doors, or they don't have the supply chains to keep their business running. And I think one of the main reasons we can get through this and how we're going to do it is to wear our masks. I mean, I know it sounds very simple, but as a customer to a business, we can't have our businesses return back to normal without customers feeling like they can be safe. And you would think this would not be a very controversial subject, but there are parts of our state where mask mandates have been passed and then they have been rescinded. And now some stores, like in Jefferson County, are not, they're forbidding people from wearing masks. Some of the gun stores down there are forbidding people from wearing masks because of safety reasons. So our whole state and country is still struggling through this. And so that's why it's super important to have leaders at the top of the ticket that are going to be able to work to make sure that, number one, our people are safe and our businesses and our communities are safe. I worked with small business owners during and after 9/11 when I worked for St. Louis County Economic Council. So I have some experience helping businesses in this respect, and I plan to take that experience to the Treasurer's office. Also, this election is super important this time because we also have an opportunity to have more diversity in our ticket, both at this national level and the statewide level, than we've ever had before. One of the things that was brought to my attention is that the Treasurer's office is not very diverse. Of the 45 people that work there, there's 1 African-American and 2 Hispanic people. Now, my plan is to bring and have an internship program with the HBCU, Lincoln University, that's right there in Jefferson City. Bring those students in, teach them about economics and finance, and implement some of the new programs that I have in mind in the unclaimed property division. And I think you'll also find that we have people who are paying attention to all of the civil justice issues that have been happening. At no time before in our history have so many people, especially persons who are not people of color, have participated in this. And so we need to keep that momentum going. We need to reward all of those people who have been peacefully protesting with taking their passion and their ideas for change and giving them a vehicle through which they can implement those. And you can only do that when you elect Democrats to the top of the ticket. And I think the last reason why this is so important, this election, because we know that the national ticket is not the type of person who should be representing anybody. We know that the people representing us in Jefferson City, with the governor, we know that Missourians deserve better. This election is not about me or Yinka or Nicole or anybody else who's running. It's about the voters. You guys deserve better government. You deserve people who care about your health, who care about your child and your grandchildren's education, and who really care about working families. And the only way that can happen is if our ticket is elected. And we are working very hard. We are working hard even during COVID. I have reached out to so many people, and we've outraised my opponent the last 2 quarters. He was appointed by Governor Parson. So we also have an opportunity to get democratically elected leaders to our state. We only have one person who was elected, one Republican who was elected to the office who's serving in the office right now, who was elected to that office. And so this is a change moment. It's now or never. We have this opportunity. We have to keep that momentum going. And every time you see an ad on TV or you hear the president speak, vow to yourself that you're going to call one more friend, get one more friend to vote early, or make one more donation to your favorite candidate. That's how we get this done. One vote and one contribution at a time. So I want to thank you guys so much for giving me time to talk. And I will stick around after listening to my good friend Yinka's speech, and then we will answer any questions you might have. So thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. There was a lot of information there in those last few minutes. If you have any questions, Vicki, please submit them to us using the question and answer icons that are on your screen. And we will be going through those questions after Yinka's presentation. So with that, I'm going to introduce Yinka Faleti. He is an immigrant American, a graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point, a U.S. Army veteran, a lawyer, husband, and father of 4. He is a Democratic nominee for Missouri Secretary of State. And with that, I will turn it over to him.
Well, thank you so much, Mike, for that introduction. And I want to thank so many other members of your executive committee and Brian and Maureen and Kathy. Thank you all for what you do to make sure that we are represented in a strong way out in St. Louis region, in the western part of our region. And thank you all who are on the other side of the screen who are joining in tonight. Thank you for being Democrats and for standing up for the things that we believe and the good many Missourians also believe in. You know, you heard Vicki talk a little bit about yesterday being Labor Day and the Labor Day kind of ushering a special season of the year. And it is indeed special. And yesterday in itself is something that we should always remember. You know, Labor Day was created by the labor movement of the late 19th century, and it became a federal holiday in 1894. And we celebrate Labor Day because it marks the achievement of working men and women all throughout our country. In the late 1800s, you had the average American worked, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. And you had children who were as young as 5 and 6 years old working in mills and mines and factories all over this country. And only because, and they were working for a smidgen of what their adult counterparts earned, only because of the activism of American workers did these conditions change, and that we and the workers today now enjoy the 5-day-a-week work week for most workers and the 8-hour-a-day work day for most folks. So I just think it's important for us to pause and to celebrate Labor Day, which is all of the things that are part of Labor Day and what we believe as Democrats. We believe in taking care of people. So my name is Yinka Faleti. I am the Democratic nominee working for voter inclusion and working against Jay Ashcroft's voter suppression. I'm the Democratic nominee for Missouri Secretary of State. Now, you know, I am, if you pause for a minute, you'll probably quickly realize I'm the only Yinka Faleti in all of the St. Louis region. In fact, I posit that I'm the only Yinka Faleti in all of Missouri, but still there are about 20 different versions of my name going around. So I like to say, correct at least once. You know, when people see my last name, Faleti on paper, they think it's Italian. They think it's Faleti. And then they meet me and they're like, "You're not Italian." It happens to me all the time. So it is wonderful to be here with you this evening. You know, many moons before becoming the nominee, I immigrated to the US from Lagos, Nigeria. So that is the origin of my name. And I came here when I was 7 years old. I grew up mostly in Florida and Texas, high school in Texas, and from Texas earned my US citizenship and then earned my appointment to the United States Military Academy at West Point. You know, and West Point was we like to say 7 years squeezed into 4. But I'm honored that I had the opportunity. I graduated in 1998. I was commissioned as an officer in the U.S. Army, specifically in the armor branch. So I served on tanks and in tank units on active duty for over 6 years. Many of us will remember a guy named Saddam Hussein. We deployed from Fort Hood, Texas to Kuwait in 2001, and our job was to keep him at bay, to ensure that he would not even think about trying to invade Kuwait again. And we did that in 2001. We came back to Fort Hood in August of 2001. We all remember what happened the very next month in September, when so many of our fellow Americans were slain and our country was attacked on 9/11. And so after 9/11, I found myself back in the same deserts I've been in just a few weeks prior, right back in Kuwait. But it felt great to be part of a group of people who could defend the country in that time. Fast forward 2004, I leave the Army as a captain. I moved to St. Louis Law School, Washington University. Now, my plan, and I underscore plan, was to study for 3 years, go back into the Army, continue serving, but this time serve as an Army lawyer. But a firm here named Brian Cave had other plans for me. And so instead of going back into the Army, I went to work as a litigator, practicing law at Brian Cave. And I practiced in product liability primarily, and also some commercial litigation. Now, it was exciting work. I was working with some of the best lawyers anywhere, working on exciting cases. But after a few years at Brian Cave, I really began to miss the larger than life service mission of the Army. I really wanted to get back to service. And so I figured I'd use my newfound legal skills and use them to help people and to serve, and went to be a state prosecutor at the Circuit Attorney's Office. This was when Jennifer Joyce was the prosecutor. And I loved helping victims of crime. I loved helping people who had been assaulted, people who had been abused, burglarized. There is no thank you like the thank you that you get from the victim of a crime. And so I'm doing this work and I'm enjoying helping victims. And I begin to realize after a few years there that I'm really too late. I'm too late for the victim. The crime has already occurred. The thing has already been done. I could not undo what had been done. I could give the victim a sense of justice, but ultimately I'm really too late. I began to realize that I'm also too late for the defendant. Because before somebody is 19 and 20 burglarizing, assaulting, they are 17, 15, and 11, and 8, years old like my own son is 8, and 5 years old like my first daughter is 5, and 3 like my second daughter is 3. And I began to think, what if at 8 and 5 and 3 and younger, we're investing in early education, in that family unit, in that community. When that young man or woman is 19 or 20, they're not burglarizing, assaulting. They're about to graduate college. They're thinking about doing something positive with their life. And I began to realize I was on the back end of the issues, and I needed to get from the back to the front. I looked to the front. I saw United Way of Greater St. Louis. I went there as senior VP. I led the division that raised the money, and in 4 years led the team to raise $300 million for our Greater St. Louis region. Obviously, I didn't do it by myself. I had a terrific team. I had great volunteers, but even after raising $300 million, realized that we still had so many challenges in our region, and it wasn't just the money. There was something more systemic at play. There was something causing people to need the help in the first place. My first full calendar year at United Way was 2014. And we all remember what happened 6 years ago in August when Michael Brown was shot and killed in Ferguson, Missouri. That was my first full calendar year. And I'm thinking, here I am, I'm doing this work. I'm already here. What more can I do? And it began something in me thinking about what more I could do to get further upstream, to get at the root cause of the issues. And so after 4.5 years at United Way, I went to lead a nonprofit called Forward Through Ferguson, the successor nonprofit to the Ferguson Commission after the Michael Brown Jr. shooting. Now, I knew that this was not going to be the feel-good work of United Way. This was going to be long-term, entrenched, generational work. And I was up for it. But after a bit at Forward Through Ferguson, I began to realize that many of the issues we were working on, when we pulled the thread back on those issues, the thread ended at the state level. Education in Missouri, the funding formula is set at the state level. Healthcare in Missouri, prior to August 4th, healthcare in Missouri, Medicaid expansion was a state level decision. I needed to get to the state level. And that's why I'm running. And specifically for Secretary of State, because that is where the fight is for democracy in our state. Many of you, some of you, I presume most, maybe all of you know what the role of Secretary of State is, but I don't want to assume, because there might be folks who may not be as familiar. The Secretary of State has many responsibilities, but 2 are principal and paramount. Number 1, Secretary of State sets many of the rules, conditions, and funding for voting and elections throughout Missouri. Number 2, sets the language unilaterally, sets the language, the final language that voters vote on for ballot initiatives in that booth. That language is set by the Secretary of State. And one does not have to be a lawyer to know that how you language something, how you message it, whether it's clear, whether it's confusing with a bunch of double negatives, whether voters don't even understand what they're voting for, has everything to do with whether the thing ultimately succeeds or fails, because it has to do with how voters perceive the thing. And that's the power of the post. It is no exaggeration when I say that everything you care about, name it, education, healthcare, good jobs, climate change, criminal justice reform, name the issue, name the candidate you care about, the post, president, U.S. Senator, U.S. House of Representatives, governor, et cetera, a local office. If we cannot get the votes because the Secretary of State, by policies and procedures, is making it more difficult for people to vote, is creating artificial barriers, putting up hurdles to voting, or making it so confusing that you need a flow chart to vote. As we do now in Missouri, you need a flow chart. You heard Kathy talk at the outset about all the different rules of voting, and she just talked about the main ones, just some of the key ones to keep in mind. It is ridiculous how complicated voting is. And it's complicated by design, by deliberate effort. It is calculated and calibrated to be complicated, and it should not be. That flies in the face of the very thing that I fought for as a soldier. The soldiers, sailors, airmen, and women are fighting for today: democracy. that everyone in Missouri, no matter their political persuasion, no matter what side of the aisle they fall on, everyone who's eligible has access to safe, secure elections in Missouri, that they can exercise their fundamental and constitutional right without artificial barriers, without a bunch of hurdles, without difficulty, without confusion. That's what the Secretary of State ought to be doing. That's not what we have in Missouri. In Missouri, we have a Secretary of State that has been cited by the nonpartisan Center for American Progress Action Fund. Just last month, this organization, nonpartisan organization, released a report. They cited examples of 4 secretaries of state in the nation who are hindering, quote unquote, hindering free and fair elections. Guess who was on that list? That's right, Jay Ashcroft. I mean, it's ridiculous, all the shenanigans and all the things he's done to make it harder for people to vote in Missouri, or make it harder to access the ballot initiative petition process. And we know that process is so important because in a state where the supermajority in the state house is Republicans, the ballot initiative petition has been the way that we've been able to get progressive things done for the people of the state of Missouri. Think about raising the minimum wage, beating back right to work, clean Missouri, medical marijuana, all ballot initiatives. And Ashcroft has made it more difficult. Look what he did last summer with the would-be referendum on women's reproductive rights. So this is what we have in Missouri. We have the fox guarding the henhouse, and that's not what it should be. We can do so many things to make voting more accessible, easier for people to vote, engage more people in a democratic process who are eligible, and make our state the state that it can be, the state that it ought to be, the more inclusive and more representative state, the more democratic, small d, democracy state that it should be. And that's why I'm running for Missouri Secretary of State. As I wrap up, let me give you a quick update on our campaign. We launched a campaign in October. From October 3rd, when we launched, through present, we have outraised Jay Ashcroft by a margin of over 3-1. To date, we have raised around $600,000 for this campaign. We are by far outpacing Jay Ashcroft's raise, and in fact, have now throughout the whole cycle, because remember, he began the campaign when I started with $0. He already had $230,000 in the bank or thereabouts. And now we have caught up, and we are nearly, we are neck and neck for cash on hand. So that means we're at a state now where we can begin fighting fire with fire. So we are very, very excited. We have a terrific shot at winning this seat in November. And we need 3 things to win. The first thing we need is your thoughts and prayers. I am a man of faith. And so if you are as well, I appreciate your prayers. If you are not, I appreciate your thoughts. Number 2, we need votes. We need not just your votes. Absolutely, we need your votes, and we need them early. Please do not wait until November 3rd. As Kathy talked about at the outset, there are so many ways, if you are eligible, to be able to vote absentee, vote by mail. Do not wait. Please vote early and encourage others to vote. The Missouri Democratic Party has a voter registration effort that you can plug into, and you can sponsor the party to help register other people to vote. The way we win is by addition. So help with your votes and help others to be able to vote. The number 3 thing that we need, the number 3, and I always forget this one. It's, man, what is that? It's green. It folds. It's got pictures of, can somebody help me with this one? It's got pictures of presidents on it. Can anybody know the number 3 thing?
That's called money, Yinka.
Ah, thank you. I knew Vicki would come around. Thank you, Vicki. Money. We need money. We absolutely need your money, and we believe it's going to take, again, 1.1 and 1.2 million to win this race. We've raised around $600,000. We're only halfway there. So whatever you can give, whether it's $100, $25, $5, $50, $1, whatever it is within your means, please contribute to our campaign. I will put the link in our in the chat so you can contribute and you can learn more and you can encourage others to get engaged. So I will pause there. I will turn it over back to our facilitator to facilitate the Q&A. Thanks so much for your attention so far.
All right, thank you. And as I think we just saw there, it looks like there's some great teamwork among our candidates going into this election this year. I think we have a strong group of candidates all up and down the ticket, but as you've heard tonight, it's going to be very important for turnout. And there was a great suggestion there. If you have the opportunity and are eligible to, do vote early. I can tell you, when I lived in North Carolina many years ago, I always took advantage of voting early. Unfortunately, when they went to a Republican governor, they cut back on some of their early voting hours. I'm hoping this year they've expanded it, especially since I have 2 children there. But we have a few questions. But with that, I'm going to ask one of my own about early voting, since you brought it up. How much power would the Secretary of State have over setting early voting hours?
Well, that's a terrific question. You know, the Secretary of State has some powers by statute, and other powers are granted to the state legislature. There are things that have to be done legislatively. However, the Secretary of State has a tremendous amount of power in pushing for this change. Let me give you an example. It was because of Ashcroft when the state legislature in May passed that limited vote by mail measure. You'll recall that part, and that was signed by the governor in June. You'll recall that part of that measure does not allow folks who vote by mail, folks who vote by mail and don't qualify under one of the health exceptions have to get their ballot notarized. Well, Ashcroft was the one pushing for that. He was the one who wanted folks to have to get their ballots notarized, which defeats the whole purpose of vote by mail during a global pandemic. So Secretary of State is very, very influential, has a lot of authority independently of the state legislature, and is able to affect the state legislature in a lot of ways because he or she is the chief elections officer. Okay. The other thing is, the other thing that's important to remember, Secretary of State has control over the purse strings when it comes to elections. For example, in 2020, this year, under the CARES Act, Missouri got funding for voting in elections. And that money was intended to have gone out to local election authorities to do things like hire more poll workers, ensure more polling places are open, ensure that a more robust infrastructure for vote by mail, and so on. And much of that money has not gone out to local election authorities. It has sat with Jay Ashcroft's office. And so one of the questions that people are asking is, why has he not distributed that money throughout the local election authority? So that's the power, that's part of the power of the Secretary of State, is the power of the purse. And so a lot of authority, direct and indirect authority to affect elections and voting throughout the state.
Okay. I'll try and bounce back and forth here between the two of you as these questions come in. Vicki, you mentioned interns, but do you have any other specific plans you can share about upgrading the treasurer's office?
Well, upgrading is definitely a relative term. So one of the main reasons I even was interested in the treasurer's office in the first place was when I was a state legislator, I was handed a CD-ROM, if you can remember those, right? And someone said, look, here are all the people in your district who we owe money to. Go find them and give them back their money. And I said, whoa, wait a minute. You want me to return lost money to my constituents? That's like the ultimate job, right? I mean, it's a really great thing to have. And so the treasurer's office is kind of like Missouri's lost and found. When there are checks that are due back, for example, if you put a deposit down on your electric meter when you move into an apartment or a building, and when you move, if they can't find you to give you your deposit back, then the power company has to give that check, that money, to the treasurer to become the custodian of those funds. And then it's the treasurer's job to try to find you. So also there are auctions the treasurer's office has every year with the contents of safe deposit boxes. Same thing, the banks have to turn over anything that's in a safe deposit box after a certain amount of time. And then it's the treasurer who auctions those items off, keeps those funds, and then tries to find the person that those funds belong to. So because I've been in online retail for 20 years, I plan to bring the treasurer's auctions online. I had planned to do this before COVID. It's a way to save money. We don't need to have an auction, in-person auction every year that nobody knows about and nobody attends, and you end up selling items for way below their market value. Why not sell to the world and get a better price on those items for Missouri taxpayers, save the money, and also that's one of the things that the students, the interns would be working on, is bringing those things online, also teaching other entrepreneurs how to improve their business. And the interns would also be working on finding more Missourians to return their unclaimed property to. So that's just one of the many ideas, but there are a lot of things. If you check my website out at vickyenglund.com, I have one new idea every day for the last 100 days of the election on how we can get Missouri's economy back on track. And a lot of them have to do with modernizing or bringing our government up to speed to the right technology.
Okay. I have one that came in. It's not addressed to any particular candidate, so I'll let each one answer for themselves. If elected, how do you ensure positive change lasts and doesn't change when the next election happens? So, who would like to go first? Looks like Vicki.
So I think the main way to do this is what I talked about when I talked about building our bench. So as you know, your vote, any bill that's passed and any proposition that's passed at the ballot box is only as good as the legislature and the governor who's in place to make sure it happens. So for example, Medicaid expansion, I'm very excited that that passed. It's going to be very important that the governor we have to implement it is a Democrat, and Nicole Galloway. And it's going to be important that the treasurer we have is actually another position that's going to be vital to Medicaid expansion. You have to actually request those funds from the federal government. And if you don't have the right political people in charge of that, we're not going to be able to influence and make sure that the voters' voices are heard. So we need to invest in our bench, keep good candidates coming through the pipeline, and start building back our legislature. Like I said, we have term limits, so we have to really focus on our people and focus on our technology to be able to recruit people, to be able to get people like you interested and involved in our politics. And it's through the strength of our people that we're going to be able to have lasting effects and not just change every cycle.
Yinka, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, well, I agree with Vicki. In addition, the first part of making positive change is being able to make positive change, is being able to vote for the positive change. And part of the challenge in our state is in the last several years, we haven't had a Secretary of State that's allowed people to do that without a bunch of barriers and artificial rules and just nonsense and shenanigans that have disenfranchised so many voters throughout the state. And voters have been disenfranchised, one, through the ballot box because of all these rules. For example, the vote by mail example I just gave you, folks who still have to get their ballots notarized, but also through the ballot initiative process. And I gave you the example of the would-be referendum on women's reproductive rights just last summer, and how Ashcroft sat on that would-be referendum to prevent it from even getting the opportunity to get on the ballot and giving the people an opportunity to even vote on it. I mean, so the first thing is we've got to be able to vote for positive change. That's the first step. So once we're able to oust Ashcroft and put in and hopefully, if I'm honored to be our next Secretary of State, be able to enable and empower the people of Missouri to exercise their fundamental right to make the positive change. Then you can make it last through making sure we have a governor, as Vicki said, and Nicole Galloway, who will do the will of the people. I mean, we have seen this Republican-controlled legislature time and again. The people vote on something, that legislature wants to roll it back, undo it, undermine it. I mean, we're seeing it right now. Amendment 3 on the ballot in November, dirty Missouri. I mean, you're seeing, and thank goodness for the Western District Court. Thank goodness for the Western District Court saying that the language that the Republicans try to, the ridiculous and preposterous language they try to get on there to confuse voters. Thank goodness the court said, we're not going for that, and we're going to put some fair language on there. And so this is all part of it, and this is how we do it. We first elect a new Secretary of State, and then we ensure we have a governor and other leaders who will do the will of the people once they make a change through the ballot initiative process.
Okay. Again, one that I'll let each candidate answer. What is your action plan for your first 90 days in office once you are elected?
If I may, I feel so passionate about this. I mean, the people of this state, and I talked about at the outset of my remarks, I talked about the labor movement. You know, when people get fed up, they get fired up. And the people of this state are fed up and they're fired up. And what the people of this state are saying they want, they want no excuse vote by mail. You ought to be able to vote by mail, just like Mike, you talked about doing in North Carolina years ago. You ought to be able to vote by mail, and you shouldn't need an excuse to exercise your fundamental right. We have a fundamental right to vote, and we need to respect the right to vote. It is what makes us different from so many other countries. So the first thing, my first priorities is to push for no excuse vote by mail. We also need automatic voter registration. Let me give you an example. We have so many of our young people who turn 18, and you know what? They don't have to lift a finger. They don't have to fill out a paperwork. They are automatically registered to pay taxes to the IRS. Automatically registered. They are automatically opted into that process. Why can't we automatically be opted in once our young people turn 18, be automatically registered to vote? We can do that. When people go to the Department of Motor Vehicles, they should be able to register right then and there. We can do that. There's so many ways we can do automatic voter registration. And so that would be one of my priorities. I'll give you the example of the 401k. Many of you work for a company that has a 401k. And 401ks for some firms used to be optional. They'd have 15, 16% participation, even though the firm was matching 100%. Vicki knows about this. She knows about this being running for treasurer. And now when these same firms, they said, you know what, instead of making it where you have to opt in, you got to opt out. So they're automatically opted into the 401k. Percentages went up to 85, 90%. We can do the same thing with voting. We would see our voting participation go up. So that's something else I'll push for. Another thing I'll push for is robust and serious voter education. I mean, we do a horrible job. I mean, you heard Kathy say at the outset, all of these things that voters have to do, we need to educate voters on the things they need to do, and we need to simplify the process. I would be serious about simplification so that voters don't have to have, a JD, a PhD, and an MD to understand how to vote. You ought to be able to vote no matter who you are, and it ought to be easy. So these will be some of my top priorities as should I be so honored to be our next Secretary of State.
Well, historically, when our country is in a recession, economic downturn, if you will, they have over the last 100 years always elected a Democrat as treasurer. And so what that tells me, and my main goal as treasurer, is to get Missouri's economy back on track. And so we are going to have a targeted small business and agricultural loan program to target small businesses affected most by COVID-19. We have to follow, hopefully, Governor Galloway's plan for COVID. If we cannot get this thing under control, there is no way we're going to be able to get anyone's economy back on track. So we need to take a very serious look at how we can help our small businesses, how we can direct investments in the Treasurer's office to make sure that we're investing in companies that are growing and that are not taking those funds and doing things that in other countries or whatnot. We have to really make a case to Missouri that we are here to provide the leadership that's been lacking statewide. And so that's kind of what my overall goal is for my administration. But the first 90 days will be critical. The first 90 days, we are going to be going through a lot of change in this country. We are going to need to prepare for when we have a vaccine that can be distributed, and we need to make sure that we have small businesses who are capable of helping the government provide that distribution. Also, we need to start manufacturing more supplies, and what better way for small businesses to get a boost in Missouri, because we are good at making stuff in Missouri. So we need to really incentivize businesses to be making the types of products that the whole country will need to get through COVID, whether it's testing materials, whether it's the types of containers that you need to be able to have the vaccines produced in. There are a lot of things that we need to be doing. And as Democrats, we need to take advantage of the situation where people are paying attention. There are people now who are paying attention to politics like they've never paid attention to before. And I've already started recruiting candidates to run for 2022, and I will continue that work into the new year as well.
This election is quite different than many others, just, in terms of campaigning. Have there been discussions about debates between you and your opponents? And I'll ask each candidate that.
Well, we have, we actually, the NAACP of Missouri actually challenged Ashcroft, invited both Ashcroft and our campaign to a debate. They had not, despite contacting and reaching out to Ashcroft's office, they had not heard back. And we actually just recently reached out to Ashcroft's campaign for the same. So we are eager, we are excited, we look forward to having a debate. We want to understand why Jay Ashcroft thinks the right thing to do is to suppress votes, why he thinks the right thing to do is to make it harder for people to vote, why he thinks the right thing to do is to deny Missourians the opportunity to access the ballot initiative petition process. So we are excited for that. We look forward to it. We have not yet heard back, and we hope that Jay Ashcroft will come out and do what he and live up to the responsibility that he owes to the people of Missouri, to explain his actions over the last 3.5 years, and to explain to Missourians why it's harder to vote today than it was under Jason Kander's administration, than it was under Robin Carnahan's administration. So we look forward to that.
I will say that my opponent was appointed to be the state treasurer about 1.5 years ago by Governor Johnson when the treasurer's office became vacant. As you may remember, Eric Schmidt was actually elected state treasurer in 2016. He was appointed to be the attorney general when Josh Hawley left that position to be a Missouri senator. So my opponent has been there 1.5 years. Every reporting period, we have 10 times the number of donors that he has. We've outraised him every quarter. I'm not sure exactly if he's actually doing anything. I don't think he's been sending out any emails. What I can tell you is he's spending his campaign dollars to put gasoline in his airplane and then flying around the state to tell people what a bad idea Medicaid expansion was. So I think my opponent's just dialing it in and relying on Donald Trump to carry him through the election. So no, we have not discussed any kind of debates or anything like that so far for the campaign.
Okay. You talked about how important it is for us as voters. How do we excite people? The question says, as you say, we have a Republican supermajority, so it's really important to convince people that our vote matters. Do you have any suggestions on how we talk to our friends and neighbors and family members and stress the importance of voting?
Yeah, let me take this one first, Yinka. So if you guys remember back in 2016, Donald Trump won our state with about 58% of the vote. Eric Greitens, the gubernatorial candidate at the time, if you might remember him, he only won with 51%. So we've got 7-ish% of people who only voted for president and didn't even bother to vote for the Republican governor on the ticket. So what that tells me is, and if you remember in 2018, we were able to do things like pass Clean Missouri. Prior to that election, we were able to kill the right to work amendment. And we were able to pass Medicaid expansion this past August. So if you're doubtful that a Democrat can win in red Missouri, you need to refresh your ideas. We have been marked by the U.S. News and World Report as no longer being a solid red state. We are not even leaning likely Republican anymore. We are now leaning Republican. The very next state, the very next notch in the political board is toss-up, and Jill Shoup's race is considered a toss-up. And so we are moving in the right direction. It is difficult to elect Democrats to state representative districts that have been gerrymandered. I know I was gerrymandered out of my own district. I had to move in order to run in 2012 and keep my seat. But statewide, a different issue. Our voters are out there. We are able to pass initiative after initiative after initiative that are the core principles of the Democratic Party. What we need to do in all communities, even if we're looking at, say, part of a community that typically only votes 39% Democrat, Yinka and I don't need to win those parts or those counties with 51%. We need to make sure we lose those counties by no fewer than 45%. And that's how we are able to carry the state. So don't think that just because our state legislature is out of whack that we cannot win. I have already saw a poll today that Trump's percentage is down to 5%. So we are at the exact right time to have this exact momentum carry us across the finish line. We just have to make sure that our voters are ready, willing, and able to do what it takes to get their ballots turned in this year.
Well, yeah, I agree with Vicki, and I'm going to add this. The way you motivate people to come out, you ask them a simple question. Are you better off today under the Parson-Ashcroft administration than you were 4 years ago? I mean, that's the fundamental question. And you remind people of the comment that Parson said when he said that kids will get COVID and they'll simply get over it. And then you put that next to the fact that in Columbia, the University of Missouri, we have a COVID issue, and all over the state we have COVID cases on the rise. You remind people of the statement that Jay Ashcroft made when he said about a month and a half ago when he said that he doesn't know a father alive who wouldn't risk catching COVID or even dying so that his kid could go back to school this fall. You remind them of that's what Republican leadership looks like. You remind them of the Center for American Progress Action Fund, citing Ashcroft as one of secretaries of state in the country hindering free and fair elections. You remind them of, since 2014 in this state, we have had 10 rural hospitals closed in this state. And you remind them that the political party and leadership in the state of Missouri has stood and watched as fellow Missourians have died because of lack of access to health care. And you remind them and you say, is that what you want? Is that the kind of leadership you want, where people have to drive darn near over an hour should they have an emergency in the middle of the night? That's what we're talking about. You remind the people that this election is about life and death, and that is not hyperbole. That is life. This COVID is killing people. And we have a Republican leadership that refuses to enforce any kind of statewide mask mandate while people are dying in masses. That's how you motivate them. And if that doesn't motivate people, I don't know what will. It is time to have leadership in this state that respects the life of people, that wants to move this state forward, that respects people over politics, that leaders that will allow people to vote. That's what we need in this state. A state with COVID out of control, the economy going in the pits, led by Republicans for over 3.5 years. And what did they have to show for it? Earlier in our state legislature, when COVID was raging out of control, you know what they were talking about? They were talking about brass knuckles. Brass knuckles. When they should have been talking about brass tacks. You remind people of that, you'll have every single Democrat out in this state voting on November 3rd, and you'll have people who aren't Democrat flipping to be a Democrat voting. Just like this morning, Harold Diehlman, lifelong Republican, endorsed Jill Shoup for U.S. Congress just today. That's what we're seeing. That's the movement that's happening in Missouri. You have even Republicans saying, we're tired of this. That's how you get Democrats out to vote. And if you do that, we win in November.
Okay.
Amen, brother.
I have some more questions here, but I just want to remind the people who are watching that if you do have questions, please get them submitted now using the question and answer function. I think somebody tried using the raised hand function. We are not using that function tonight. We're just using the question and answer function. So just a point of clarification, I think Kathy may have actually said it earlier, but will Missouri be using drop-off boxes for ballots this fall?
So this is just yet another example. So earlier, I think it was about a month ago or so, the Post-Dispatch ran an article. And so we actually, we actually have these boxes. The people of Missouri have actually paid for 85 of these boxes. And we know that's not enough, but we have them that could be put around the state. We know what Trump is doing with the post office. I mean, they are not even trying to hide it anymore. They are doing voter suppression. In the old days, they were trying to at least hide the voter suppression under the guise of a poll tax or under the guise of a literacy test. Now, they're not even trying to hide it. And you see what Trump has done with the post office under the leadership of DeJoy. In Missouri, we have 85 of these boxes that would allow Missouri voters to simply, without having to rely on the post office that's been degraded by design, without having to rely on the post office, they could put their ballots in these boxes, like many other responsible secretaries of state are doing in other states, in libraries, in common areas, in public places, so that people can vote. You know what Ashcroft said? About a month ago, it was reported in the Post-Dispatch that he was not going to distribute these boxes because he doesn't want people to, quote, self-disenfranchise. Give me a break. Give me a break. So that's what we have in Missouri. So unfortunately, the answer to your question is because of Jay Ashcroft's voter suppressive tactics, no, we will not, unfortunately, for November, have these boxes that could make voting easier and more accessible for Missourians, unfortunately.
Okay. Combining a couple of questions here. For each candidate, what are your plans in these last weeks going into the election, specifically for your campaign, raising awareness, helping continue to get the vote, getting the vote out? And do you have to use different strategies for rural voters than you do in more urban areas? And what are the key things that you have to accomplish between now and election day? Long question, I know.
Well, what I can tell you is there's 57, 56 days left, and holy cow. I think what we tend to focus on now in this post-Labor Day time frame would typically be door knocking. And since we have COVID all across the state, we are doing a very intense phone banking operation. We're going to be doing a text banking operation, and we are actually almost ready to start our digital plan. So we're able to use technology like in no other previous election that I've had, where we can target the exact voters that we want to hear our message. Now, when it comes to the rural, urban, suburban divide, yes, we definitely, especially as state treasurer, are treating our different parts of the state differently. And what I mean by that is this. So we have a message about foreign ownership of farmland, which not a whole lot of St. Louisans or Kansas Cityans or anyone else who lives in a metropolitan area in the state knows a whole lot about. But what I can tell you about this, it's a poll tested issue. And it turns out that when, for the first time in Missouri's history, I voted, as did my opponent when we were both in the House in 2013, to allow foreign ownership of farmland. And I voted against it because I don't believe that our family farmers should be taken advantage of that way. Nor should we have national security issues where we have foreign countries in charge of our food supply here in Missouri. And my opponent voted for it. And then a couple of years later, he voted for it again and got campaign contributions. So this is an issue that is near and dear to the heartland of Missouri. And so we're going to be kicking off a campaign to let voters know what the difference is between electing me as treasurer and keeping the same person there as treasurer right now. So that is a huge issue. It's a poll tested issue. And it pisses a lot of people off that a Republican would sell out to foreign countries for that. So, but by the same token, we also don't want to forget our cities and our suburbs. Those areas, it's vital that they have the tools that they need to actually vote. I mean, and Yinka, I know we'll talk about this too, depending where you live in Missouri, it's either easier or harder to vote this time. And it could be completely safe to vote in some local jurisdictions and completely not safe from a COVID perspective to go and vote, especially if you are a poll worker. You know, we have to remember that our poll workers are typically older folks and they are the least protected from this virus. And so there are things that we're doing differently in the campaign, but what I can tell you is when I'm doing my phone calls and talking to people, people want to have someone there to listen. And so when we're doing our phone banking, and you can definitely volunteer, send me an email at info@vickyenglund.com or just go to vickyenglund.com and fill out the website to volunteer. But we are recruiting people who also just want to be that ear for people to talk to. You know, a lot of people are staying at home and they're lonely. And so we need to provide them with that human touch and let them know everything's going to be okay. And give them the information they need to be able to vote. So we are definitely kicking off the last few weeks of the campaign. I texted with Yinka over the weekend and I wanted to re-emphasize with him as a first-time candidate that, look, that last weekend, I forgot to tell you, that last weekend is the last time you're going to sleep between now and November 3rd. So not that you were getting much sleep having a newborn at home, but seriously, I'm not even joking. I'm smiling here, but it's really not that funny. So we are working 24/7. You can send emails all hours of the night. If you guys get an email from me at 4 a.m., you know that I'm working hard. So we are going to do this with the few weeks we have left.
Yeah, well, and in addition to what Vicki has expressed, and Vicki, by the way, you left out that part about not getting any more sleep after Labor Day. You didn't put that part in the text.
Well, there are reasons why we don't tell you newbies everything. You're on a need-to-know basis, Yinka, and this is the exact moment you needed to know.
So, you know, these, and as I said at the outset of my remarks, you know, Labor Day marks the beginning of a special season. And for so many reasons, and you know, now the everyday Missourian begins to really pay attention, and we want to capture folks. You know, many folks aren't paying attention to May and June and July and August, but something happens post Labor Day, and they're like, "Hey, we've got an election coming up, and oh, by the way, I can vote as early as September 22nd." And so we want to lean into that. We want to capture the imagination of people who are now just waking up to the elections and the choices, the very, very real choices that we'll have. You know, we're going to continue to do two things, and we're just going to ramp it up. We have to still continue to raise the money. We have 56 days left to do that. And you know, every day matters in terms of raising, because for our campaign, we know we have to get to that mark to be able to communicate effectively all throughout the state through all the media that we need to leverage. And it's get out the vote time. I mean, this is when, you know, we're working through the coordinated campaign, and that campaign is going to be working on behalf of all the statewide campaigns who are plugged into it to make sure that we do it. Obviously, we can't do things in the way we were doing pre-COVID in terms of voter outreach, but there's still many things that we're doing in terms of phone banking, text banking, in terms of mail, and so many other ways to engage voters. And so it's going to be get out the vote. We've been traveling. We resumed travel about a month ago or so. And, you know, we kind of paused travel from mid-March through a month ago, but we went out to Troy. All of the events we're doing now are outdoors. They're distanced, they're masked, small numbers. But we still want to go places and rally people. We're in Sedalia a few weeks ago. We were in Springfield last week. We were in Kansas City. We're going back to Kansas City. Actually, tomorrow and Thursday, we'll be back in Kansas City. The mayor there is making a special announcement about our election in a press conference on Thursday. So stay tuned for that. So we're going to continue to get out the vote. We're going to continue to press in, and our hours will get longer, and our days will get longer. But we know that's what we've got to do to move the needle and to move this state in the right direction and ensure that we elect Democrats up and down the ballot come November 3rd.
I think I've gotten through the questions and answers that have been submitted. Some of them I've combined together. I do have one last one from me here. You talked about it earlier with the Clean Missouri, Dirty Missouri, a lot of confusion. Where does the lawsuit stand about the wording that's going to be on the ballot?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I unfortunately will have to peel off after answering this question. As Vicki alluded to, I have an 8-month-old little girl, a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, and an 8-year-old. I've got to get them to bed, get ready for school tomorrow. But so the court did this. The court did two significant things. One, the court struck down the Republican language, and the court drafted its own language. And I read the language. Now, while the language is not is not the language that the plaintiffs who sued the Republicans in the first place would have liked, it is much better language than what the Republicans would have had on the ballot. It's much clearer language than what the Republicans would have had. So I think overall, I think it's in a much better place than it was prior to the lawsuit.
Can I just tell you that my favorite part of that answer was Yinka saying that he was going to go be a dad and tuck his kids in. Can I just tell you, as a woman candidate, I'm not sure I've ever heard a man candidate say that out loud and live. So good job, Daddy.
You're here. Okay, with that, I'm going to thank both of our candidates tonight. I know they're giving up a lot of their time and they're trying to do things for all of us, and they're trying to make Missouri a better place. And we appreciate everything you're doing. And I encourage people to continue to vote, encourage your friends and neighbors to vote. If you have an opportunity to vote early, seriously consider it. I know I prefer and try always to vote early whenever I can. So probably that first weekend, the satellite offices are open. I'll be down there casting my vote. But being respectful of the candidates' time, I'm just going to let them have one opportunity to say any closing remarks, and then we will wrap it up for this evening. And thank you all for attending, and thank you to our candidates.
Yeah, thank you, Vicki. And thank you, Mike, and again to the entire executive committee and all of you who have been attentive tonight, and for your questions and for your energy and for your excitement. We are so excited about what is possible for our state in November. November 3rd begins the beginning of a new chapter. November 3rd begins the beginning of an opportunity to make Missouri the kind of state that it can be, a state that respects the will of the people, respects the voice of the people, and does not do anything to stand in the way of the people exercising that voice and their choice by their vote. We cannot wait for November 3rd. We are eagerly looking for that day to come. But between now and then, in the 55 or so days, I encourage you to do these three things. Find 5 to 10 people in your network, particularly our young people who may believe they are registered but are not. Encourage them to go to vote. Encourage them to check their voter registration. Support the Missouri Democratic Party's voter registration efforts. And third, please support our campaign financially, support Vicki's campaign financially. It takes resources to do this. It does not matter the size of the gift. What matters is that you support. So please do those three things. And finally, we have a merchandise store. So in the links, we've put in the links store.yinkafaleti.com. If you're going to support, you might as well support in style. So you can order your face mask, you can order your buttons, your yard signs, yes, your yard signs, your t-shirts, your hoodies, your coffee mugs, all the things that you need to have to show your support for freedom and democracy in Missouri. Thank you so much. Thank you for for allowing us this time to be with you. We look forward to your vote come November 3rd, and if possible, even earlier than that. Thank you. Have a great rest of your evening. Bye-bye.
And what I would say to you guys is this. We can do this. Now, I know some of you know me and have known me for a while. Some of you, this is the first time you've met me, and I am terrible at faking excitement. I cannot be that person who wears a smile and is trying to cover up something that I don't genuinely feel. And I'm so excited this time, you guys. People are paying attention who have not paid attention in years. And part of that is because this election is so vital. We talked about that earlier tonight. Second, not only can we do this, but it's going to be okay. I know a lot of you are home. A lot of you may be struggling financially. A lot of you watch TV like I do, and if you watch it for too long and you see Donald Trump talking, you may have thrown something at your TV because it is so frustrating. It's so frustrating to be an American these days, and it's very frustrating to be a Missourian. We don't have leaders who know how to lead, but the closer we get to Election Day, the more excited I get, because I'm anticipating that when you guys go to vote, if you're going to stand in line like Mike or go there on the 22nd and vote, I'm hoping there will be lines there. I'm hoping that there will be enough people who are fed up with what's going on right now, who are going to go to the polls and make their voices heard. And third, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for sticking with us. I want to thank you for your tenacity in making sure that you go to vote. And I want to thank you for my supporters who have already donated, and thank you future supporters for donating at MissouriForward.com. $5, $10, $20, and $20. All of it is welcome. And that's why I do it. I don't do it for the fame and the glory. I do it because getting that small amount of support from someone means that they're liking what I have to say, and they want me to represent their interest in Jefferson City and for the whole state. So I'm very excited. I want to thank you guys so much for inviting me and for having this forum tonight.
Thank you. I'm glad both of you could join us tonight, and go take care of your families. To all the people who joined us tonight, thank you. Please stay safe. We do have another great webinar, seminar, Zoom meeting, whatever term you would like to use, next Tuesday. I do miss our in-person meetings when we used to get together down at the library, and hopefully we'll be able to do that again soon. But until then, we will meet next Tuesday on Zoom again. So everyone, please have a good night.